After the defeat of the Central Powers, harsh peace terms are imposed on the losing nations. Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire are dismantled, redrawing the map of Europe and the Middle East. Under the Treaty of Versailles, Germany is stripped of its colonies and significant territories. One of the most important changes is the creation of an independent Poland, which gains access to the sea through the Polish corridor, effectively splitting Germany in two. The German army is reduced to 100,000 men, with no heavy weapons, tanks, or air force allowed. Germany is also declared solely responsible for the war and forced to pay heavy reparations. The German population views these conditions as a national humiliation. However, unlike many other European countries, Germany's industrial base remains largely intact because no fighting took place on its territory. At the same time, the victors are not united. Italy is frustrated, believing it did not receive promised territorial gains despite heavy wartime losses. In the United States, the Senate refuses to ratify the Treaty of Versailles, meaning the country does not join the newly created League of Nations. This organization is meant to maintain global peace and prevent future wars. Russia, meanwhile, undergoes revolution and civil war, becoming the Soviet Union. It is excluded from the League, leaving it isolated and viewed with suspicion by Western powers fearing communist expansion. Britain focuses on maintaining its vast empire, while France, devastated by the war, struggles to enforce the peace terms without strong allies. Economic instability and the interwar crisis, war debts, combined with printing excessive money, lead to hyperinflation. When Germany falls behind on reparations, France and Belgium occupy the Ruhr industrial region to extract payments directly. Inflation spirals out of control, and by 1923 the German currency becomes nearly worthless. To stabilize the situation, the United States and United Kingdom introduce financial plans to restructure German debt and provide loans. American capital flows into Germany. This creates a global financial system heavily dependent on the United States, as European nations rely on American credit. During the mid-1920s, global trade expands and economies grow, driven by industrialization and mass production. However, this stability is fragile. Rise of extremism and global crisis. In Italy, Benito Mussolini's fascist party seizes power and establishes a dictatorship. In 1929, the Wall Street crash triggers the Great Depression, spreading economic disaster worldwide. Unemployment rises sharply, and Germany is among the hardest hit, with mass poverty and unemployment reaching extreme levels. In this environment of instability, extremist political movements gain support. In Germany, the Nazi Party rises rapidly, blaming the Treaty of Versailles, economic hardship, and internal enemies. By 1933, Adolf Hitler becomes chancellor and quickly consolidates absolute power, turning Germany into a dictatorship known as the Third Reich. Hitler rejects the Treaty of Versailles, reintroduces conscription, rebuilds the military, and begins rearmament. Western powers protest but take limited action, hoping to avoid another war. Expansion and road to global war. Italy invades Ethiopia in 1935, testing international response. In Spain, civil war erupts, with Germany and Italy supporting Francisco Franco's nationalist forces. This strengthens their alliance, forming the Rome-Berlin axis. Japan, already expanding in Asia, invades Manchuria and later China, committing widespread atrocities. Germany, Italy, and Japan form a formal alliance known as the Axis powers. Germany then annexes Austria and demands the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. Britain and France attempt to avoid war by agreeing to German demands at Munich, but Germany soon occupies the rest of Czechoslovakia anyway. In 1939, Germany demands territory from Poland. Poland refuses, and Britain and France guarantee its independence. Germany signs a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, secretly dividing Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. World War II begins on September 1, 1939. Germany invades Poland using blitzkrieg tactics, rapid, concentrated attacks combining air power and armored divisions. Poland collapses quickly. Britain and France declare war on Germany, marking the start of World War II. The Soviet Union invades eastern Poland, as agreed with Germany. Poland is divided between the two powers. The USSR then fights Finland in the Winter War, suffering unexpected resistance despite its superior forces. Although Finland loses territory, the Soviet military's weaknesses become apparent. Expansion in Europe. Germany invades Denmark and Norway, securing strategic resources. Soon after, it launches attacks on Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. German forces bypass the heavily fortified Maginot Line, advancing through the Ardennes and encircling Allied troops. Hundreds of thousands of British and French soldiers are evacuated from Dunkirk. France collapses and signs an armistice. The country is divided between German occupation and the Vichy regime. Britain continues the war alone, leading to the Battle of Britain. Germany attempts to gain air superiority through bombing campaigns, but the Royal Air Force resists successfully, preventing invasion. Globalization of the war, Italy expands its campaigns in North Africa and the Balkans but struggles militarily, forcing Germany to intervene. Germany invades Greece and Yugoslavia to secure its southern flank and resources. In June 1941, Germany launches Operation Barbarossa, invading the Soviet Union with massive forces. Initial advances are rapid, with millions of Soviet soldiers captured. However, the vast territory, harsh weather, and strong Soviet resistance slow the German advance. The battle for Moscow fails as winter conditions cripple German forces. The Soviet Union begins counterattacks, gradually stabilizing the front. War in the Pacific, Japan, seeking resources, attacks Pearl Harbor in 1941, bringing the United States into the war. Japan quickly expands across Southeast Asia, capturing territories rich in oil and raw materials. The United States begins a long counteroffensive across the Pacific, using island-hopping strategies. Naval battles gradually weaken Japan's expansion. Turning point of the war. In Europe, the momentum of World War II begins to shift decisively against the Axis powers. One of the most critical moments comes with the Battle of Stalingrad, a brutal and prolonged siege that becomes a symbol of resistance and endurance. German forces push deep into the city, fighting house to house in frozen ruins. But Soviet troops refuse to surrender. Encircled and cut off from supplies, the German Sixth Army is eventually trapped. After months of starvation, freezing conditions, and relentless Soviet counterattacks, it is forced to surrender. This defeat marks a psychological and strategic turning point, shattering the image of German invincibility on the Eastern Front. Following this, the Battle of Kursk becomes the largest tank battle in history. Germany attempts one final major offensive to regain the initiative, launching massive armored assaults. However, the Soviets are well prepared, having built deep defensive lines and gathered intelligence on German movements. The resulting clash sees enormous losses on both sides, but Germany suffers irreplaceable damage to its armored divisions. After Kursk, the Germans are forced permanently into a defensive position in the east, while Soviet forces begin a steady and powerful advance westward. In North Africa, the Axis campaign also begins to collapse. German and Italian forces, stretched across deserts and struggling with supply shortages, face increasingly coordinated Allied offensives. British and Commonwealth troops, supported later by American forces, gradually push Axis armies out of Egypt and Libya. The decisive defeat at battles such as El Alamein destroys Axis hopes of controlling the Suez Canal and Middle Eastern oil routes. Eventually, Axis forces in North Africa are completely defeated, allowing the Allies to take full control of the region and prepare for further invasions into southern Europe. At the same time, Italy itself falls into crisis. Military defeats, economic hardship, and public dissatisfaction weaken Mussolini's regime. Allied invasions of Italian territory increase pressure on the government, leading to internal political collapse. Mussolini is removed from power, arrested, and Italy begins to shift allegiances. A new government negotiates with the Allies and eventually switches sides, declaring war against Germany. However, German forces quickly occupy much of Italy, turning the peninsula into another major battleground between Axis and Allied forces. In 1944, the Allies launch one of the most important military operations in history, the D-Day invasion of Normandy. On June 6th, massive amphibious landings take place along the heavily fortified beaches of northern France. Under intense German fire, American, British, and Canadian troops storm the coastline, gradually securing beachheads after heavy casualties. This operation successfully opens a long-awaited Western Front in Europe, forcing Germany to fight a two-front war at full intensity. While the Western Allies advance through France, Soviet forces continue their relentless push from the east. The Red Army, now strengthened by experience and vast manpower, launches large-scale offensives that break through German defensive lines. Germany finds itself trapped between two powerful military fronts, one advancing from the east and the other from the west, gradually shrinking its control over occupied territories. As Allied forces progress through France, cities are liberated one by one. The French resistance rises to support the advancing armies, sabotaging German operations and assisting in the liberation efforts. Eventually, Paris is freed, becoming a powerful symbol of liberation and the collapse of German occupation in Western Europe. With France liberated, Allied armies continue pushing toward Germany's borders. At the same time, Soviet forces advance through Eastern Europe, liberating and occupying territories as they move closer to Berlin. Germany is now fully on the defensive, facing constant air raids, supply shortages, and overwhelming pressure from all sides. The once expanding Axis empire begins to shrink rapidly, setting the stage for its eventual collapse. Collapse of the Axis. By 1945, the Axis powers are in complete disintegration across Europe and Asia. In Germany, the situation becomes increasingly desperate as Soviet forces launch their final offensive toward Berlin. The capital is surrounded from all directions, cut off from supplies, reinforcements, and any realistic hope of relief. Inside the city, intense street-by-street fighting takes place as Soviet troops push deeper into the ruins of the Reich. Bombardments, artillery fire, and close-quarters combat reduce entire districts to rubble. In the final days of the war in Europe, the German leadership collapses from within. Adolf Hitler, refusing to leave Berlin, takes refuge in his underground bunker as the situation becomes hopeless. With Soviet forces closing in and the city on the verge of total capture, he commits suicide in April 1945. Shortly afterward, the remaining German command structure breaks down. Communication lines fail, orders become fragmented, and resistance loses coordination. With no central leadership and no ability to continue fighting effectively, Germany signs an unconditional surrender in May 1945. The surrender marks the complete end of the war in Europe. German armed forces lay down their weapons across all fronts, bringing an end to years of devastating conflict that had engulfed the continent. After the defeat of Germany, Europe undergoes a massive political and territorial transformation. The continent is effectively divided into two spheres of influence. Western Europe falls under the control of the Allied powers, led primarily by the United States, the United Kingdom, and France, while Eastern Europe comes under the influence of the Soviet Union. This division creates deep political tensions that reshape global relations for decades to come. Germany itself is formally partitioned and occupied by the victorious Allied powers. It is divided into different zones of control, each administered by one of the major allies. This division is intended to prevent any future military resurgence and to ensure long-term security in Europe. At the same time, major political and territorial changes are imposed across Central and Eastern Europe. One of the most significant changes involves Poland. Its borders are shifted westward, resulting in the loss of its eastern territories to the Soviet Union, while gaining former German lands in the west. This large-scale territorial adjustment leads to widespread population displacement. Millions of people, including Germans, Poles, and others, are forced to relocate as new borders are enforced, creating one of the largest forced migrations in European history. While Europe collapses into post-war restructuring, the conflict in Asia continues with full intensity. Japan remains determined to fight despite facing increasing pressure from Allied forces. The United States, advancing across the Pacific through a series of island campaigns, gradually brings the war closer to the Japanese mainland. Cities across Japan are subjected to continuous bombing raids, causing severe destruction and civilian casualties. The turning point in the Pacific comes in August 1945, when the United States drops atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These attacks cause unprecedented devastation, instantly destroying large portions of both cities and killing tens of thousands of people. The psychological and military impact of these weapons shocks the world, introducing nuclear warfare as a new and terrifying reality. At the same time, the Soviet Union declares war on Japan and begins its invasion of Japanese-held territories in Asia, including Manchuria. Facing invasion from multiple directions, complete destruction of key cities, and the collapse of its defensive capabilities, Japan realizes that continued resistance is no longer possible. In September 1945, Japan formally surrenders, bringing an end to World War II. The surrender marks the conclusion of the deadliest conflict in human history, ending years of global warfare that had reshaped nations, destroyed cities, and cost tens of millions of lives. With the Axis powers defeated, the world enters a new and uncertain era. The political map is redrawn, empires weaken, and two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, emerge as dominant global forces. The foundations are laid for a divided post-war world, where peace is restored but new tensions begin to rise almost immediately. Aftermath and global consequences, World War II ends as the deadliest conflict in human history, with tens of millions of casualties, mostly civilians. Entire cities are destroyed across Europe and Asia, Colonial empires weaken as independence movements grow. The global balance of power shifts dramatically. Two superpowers emerge, the United States and the Soviet Union. Europe is divided into Eastern and Western blocs, setting the stage for the Cold War. International institutions such as the United Nations, NATO, the IMF, and the World Bank are created to maintain stability and rebuild the global economy. The world enters a new era shaped by nuclear weapons, ideological conflict, and superpower rivalry.